Hello, everybody. Chris Hobart here, and welcome to the Wealthologist Weekly. So today we're going to be diving into some fresh employment data that dropped last week, and trust me, there is a lot to unpack. The latest report shows that the U.S. economy, well, it actually might be slowing down faster than most investors realize. So let's get into what's happening and why you should care. All right, I want to start with the headline. A headline reads, non-farm payrolls increased by 142,000 in August. Now, that's not terrible, right? But there's a kicker. You see, revisions to the June and July numbers dragged the net job gain down to just 56,000. That's a lot more modest than it initially seemed. But what's more concerning is when you dig into the details. See, we like to focus on payrolls by taking a couple of sectors out that can kind of mess with the numbers. So, for example, we want to take out of this number the government jobs, education and health service jobs, and leisure and hospitality. Now, why in the world would we do that, Chris? Well, these sectors, they're heavily influenced by government spending as well as regulation, especially the aftermath of COVID lockdowns and reopenings. Those leisure and hospitalities, those numbers kind of went crazy during that time. So we want to remove those to kind of even things out a bit. So when we strip all those out, the core payroll increase for August was only 25,000. And over the past 3 months, it's up just 31,000. And I got to tell you, that's not the kind of job growth that gives you confidence in a booming economy. Now, here's something even more eye-opening, I think. Since February 2020, right before COVID hit, the combination of government jobs and education and healthcare has made up a whopping 37% of the net job increases. That is a massive share, especially when you consider how much these sectors are tied to public funding. But let's look at the other side for a second. If you shift focus to civilian employment, that includes things like small business startups, it tells a slightly more optimistic story. You see, civilian employment rose by 168,000 in August, making the biggest gain in 5 months. Hooray! But even with that bump, it's hard to say that the U.S. economy is necessarily on solid footing. You see, civilian employment is down 66,000 compared to a year ago. And we're still, full-time employment has dropped by 1 million, while part-time jobs are up by 1.1 million over the same period. Now, this shift that happened from full-time to part-time work, this is something we've really got to keep our eyes on. It can signal that people are struggling to find stable, well-paying jobs, which obviously isn't great for long-term economic health and growth. Now, here's something that didn't necessarily make the headlines, but we got to talk about. And it's the Labor Department's recent revision down of the payroll growth for the year ending in March 2024. They revised it down by 818,000 jobs. In case you're wondering, I'm going to repeat that, 818,000 jobs. That is a huge adjustment. Now, I got to tell you, it makes sense, though, given the gap between payroll numbers and the civilian employment growth. But the concern is we might see further revisions, especially if the population numbers are revised upward. Now, on the flip side, if those revisions don't happen, we could be looking at an even sharper downturn adjustment to payrolls. All right, I want to shift gears just a little bit. This week, we're also getting news on inflation. Now, we've been expecting a moderate 0.2% increase in consumer prices for August, meaning that prices would be up around 2.5% from a year ago. Now, for those of you following closely, that's a big drop from the 3.3% increase in PCE prices, which is the Fed's favorite inflation measure, for the year ending August 2023. So you're probably wondering, what's causing this economic slowdown as well as this dip in inflation? Well, it comes to something we've talked a little bit about before. It's tight monetary policy. You see, after the massive monetary surge in 2020 and 2021, the money supply, what's called M2, we've talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that peaked in early 2022. And even though it's been inching back up since October, it's still down 3.1% from its peak in April of last year. Now, the Federal Reserve, they are well aware of this, which is why there's all this chatter about cutting interest rates. In fact, we're expecting the Fed to cut rates by a quarter point at each of their 3 remaining meetings this year, which starts this week. And they'll likely keep this trend going all the way into 2025. But there's a catch. The Fed, they are still fixated on interest rates rather than the money supply itself. Now, if the money supply, again, the M2, starts growing again, we could face a return of higher inflation, a lot like what happened back in the 1970s. Now, on the flip side, if M2 remains sluggish, even with rate cuts, the economy could hit a much harder landing, really, than anyone expects or really wants. I got to tell you, at the end of the day, I think we're going to be in for an interesting ride with a lot of moving parts. You're probably asking yourself, where does that leave us? That's a bit of a waiting game right now, to be honest with you. The economy is slowing down. There's no question about it. But whether it stalls or recovers will depend on what the Fed does next and how the money supply responds. Now, we'll keep a close eye on this in the coming months, and I'll be sure to update you with any big shifts through the Wealthologist Weekly, just like we're doing today. All right, that is all for today. Now, if you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to share this with somebody else or subscribe to the Wealthologist on YouTube for more updates on the economy, as well as how it could affect your financial future. In the meantime, stay smart, stay informed, and I will catch you on the next one.